Hello and welcome into another episode of Lockdown Wolves. Today on the show are Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards, one of the NBA's top 5 duos. I'll make the case for it. I'll give you really kind of a top 10 of NBA duos, including where I think Cat and Ant rank. We'll also talk about the Timberwolves' most recent training camp signing. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. Hopefully you're having a fantastic week so far. We are now within a week of the start of training camp. The Wolves start camp next Tuesday. Media Days next Monday. The first preseason game is now a week from Friday. That's 9 days away, believe it or not. We are there. Lots to get to today. I do want to talk about the NBA's top duos, and Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards are up there. I think we can make a case for them being a top 5 duo in the NBA. I'll give you kind of my top 10 with some honorable mentions in there as well. We'll also talk about the Timberwolves' most recent free agent signing, or I should say training camp signing, really a name that should be familiar. He's been around last year. He played for Iowa last year. We'll get to that here in a little bit. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. Let's go ahead and get into the top NBA duos. And look, credit where credit's due. I was encouraged. Locked On Mavericks was making the case for Luka and Kyrie being the NBA's best duo, and that set me down this path. I did a bit of a bit of like inventory of all the best players in the league, and various player rankings, and then also kind of how players that I think to be better than what their consensus might be, their general public consensus, Joe fan consensus, if you will, national media consensus. And then also it's an interesting conversation because obviously the best players in the league are going to find themselves on this list because they're the best players. Like Nikola Jokic has to be mentioned in the conversation because he's the best player in the league. Joel Embiid has to be mentioned because he's the best player. The question is, where do you rank Paul George? And in the case of the Nuggets, where do you rank Jamal Murray? So is the ranking more two guys that are close together in say like two top 20 guys? Does that automatically make you one of the top duos in the league? Or is it like the best player and the 25th best player or the 30th best player or whatever? So there's a little bit of all of that in here. And also there's some projecting here. This is for me for this season. It's not necessarily like mid-season last year. It's what I think is the case this year. Like, for instance, John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., obviously Memphis seen their more than their share of injuries last year. But ranking them going into this season, we have to assume those guys, we don't have to assume they're healthy, but we have to factor that in as like, look, is Ja actually better than whatever, like, I don't know, coming to the year, I think it'd be hard to say he's a top 30 player. We haven't seen him play a full season in a long time, but could he be a top 20 player if he plays a full season? Yeah, he could be. So I'm projecting a little bit. There's obviously some science and some art here. And this is my list of duos in the league. So I'm going to start at the top, who I think is, does that make sense? Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm going to start at the top with who I think the best duo in the league is and work down from there. I'm going to give you a top 10, and then I'm going to give you some honorable mentions. And not every team obviously will be listed. There are some teams that I couldn't even put one together. There's some teams that I just don't think are quite in this conversation. If I missed one, tell me in the comments on YouTube if I missed a duo that should have been top 10, or if I completely mess up this ranking in your opinion. Let me know. All right, number one has to be Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. There's no question about that. They won the title. They are two of the top 15 players in the league. I don't think there's really any argument there. Jason Tatum's obviously a top, I don't know, like how many guys are better than Jason Tatum? Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, You could argue Joel Embiid if healthy. Giannis, maybe SGA. Like he's in the 4 to 6 range in terms of the league's best players. I put Jaylen Brown in probably the right around 15 in terms of best players in the league. So I think they've got to be the number one duo. I think it's probably the best combination in terms of 2 top 15 guys. I believe outside of the Lakers, who we'll get to in a minute. I think that's the only ranking where it's definitively 2 top 10 guys. In my opinion. So I think we have to give them the number one spot in this ranking. Number 2, see, this is where it gets tricky because I went back and forth on this one for number 2, whether I was going to go, I'll give you my 2 and 3 together, whether I would go Dallas or whether I'd go Lakers, because clearly Luka is the best player of those 4. There's no question about that. I would argue he's better than Jason Tatum, but LeBron and AD together, they're both still top, 14 players. So does Luka's pull as one of the top 3 players in the league pull up Kyrie, who's probably in the 25 to 30 range? Does that cause them to be ranked higher than LeBron and AD? I'm going to go LeBron and AD number 2. That might seem crazy. And look, I get it. The Lakers didn't make the playoffs last year. Look at the rest of the roster. That's why. It's not because of LeBron and AD. And I know LeBron can only play, 60-something games, most likely, if that. I get it. And AD's old too, and they're both injury prone. But again, when they're healthy, LeBron and AD are still 2 of the top 15, probably top 12 players in the entire league. And I don't think that's crazy. My number 3 duo is Luka and Kyrie. Luka, I think, is the second best player in the league, maybe third best player. If Embiid's healthy, maybe the 4th best player. But right now, I don't know. Outside of Jokic, I don't know who I would, with the straight face, be able to say is certainly better than Luka Doncic. And Kyrie, give credit where credit's due. I mean, a year ago, I would have said he was a borderline top 50 player. But together, the 2 of them, to me, it's hard to do much better. They just went to the finals. We have to give them some credit as a duo. And how they complement each other. And I was very skeptical that 2 ball-dominant guards, really is what they are, would work so smoothly together, especially since neither one of them is exactly a lockdown defender. Luka's obviously improved a little in that regard, and Kyrie can guard smaller guards okay, and Kyrie's 34, I think, right? 34. I think he's 30 or 30, 32, I guess. But still, I think they have to be number 3 in this ranking. I think it's Tatum Brown. And then I think the next 2 are close. I think it's LeBron and AD, and then it's Luka and Kyrie are next. My 4th pairing. This is where it starts to get a little bit complicated. Man, I'm even now I'm waffling. I'm trying to give this list with conviction. This is where I think we have to really lean into. This is a great example of a top end talent elevating the overall pairing, and that's Giannis and Dame. I think Giannis and Dame have to be number 4 on this list. Giannis is a top 4 player. Dame is still a top 25 player, in my opinion. And while Dame struggles defensively, which is a very polite way of saying that, Giannis is still a fantastic 2-way player. And there was a lot of stuff going on with that Milwaukee team last year. The midseason coaching change, the coaching hire in the first place, the start of last year, but then the midseason change, injuries, and then late in the season, more injuries to Giannis. But the way that team, the last couple of years have just been really rocky, but I'm hard pressed to put them any lower than 4 on this list. I have Giannis and Dame 4th on this list in terms of best NBA duos. So the question is, do Ant and Cat make it into the top 5? We'll hit that next, and I think it's very close. So we'll do that here next. We'll give the rest of the top 10, and we'll close the show by talking about the Timberwolves' most recent training camp edition. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. I did pretty good this weekend. There were 2 Monday night games Monday. That was fun. Washington plus 7.5. I think I actually got them at plus 8.5 over Cincinnati. That was a good bet. They actually ended up winning that game outright. On Sunday, I'm trying to remember, I had the under on, which is maybe boring, but under on Cardinals and Lions, which was also a good pick. And I think I had Ravens money line over the Cowboys. All three of those picks hit. Go check them out over at FanDuel. Again, if you're watching the games on Sunday or whenever, you can see the latest stats, live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page that you place your bets. Also, you can get yourself started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Again, just do that at FanDuel.com. Place your first $5 bet, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed at FanDuel.com. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, top 4 duos in the NBA. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, number 1. Small gap. LeBron James, Anthony Davis, 2, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, 3, and those guys are close in their own tier. The next tier I had 4th, Giannis Antetokounmpo with Milwaukee and Dame Lillard with Milwaukee at number 4. For me, number 5 is Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns, and I'll make the case very quickly. I think the other day I called him a top 10 to 12 player. I think he's probably more on the 10 side of that. I think he's right around the 10th best player in the league right now. Again, factoring what I think he will do this year, Karl-Anthony Towns is still a top 25 player. He's right around 25. He was an all-star last year, which implies he's a top 24, 25 player, 26 player, whatever. So I don't think that's crazy at all. And you have to factor in that Cat's in his prime. Ant is still not even in his athletic prime. Like, he's still getting better. He grew within the last couple of years. Like, he's literally getting, still maturing as a human, physically and obviously also off the court too. And the leap that he made last year to go from a borderline all-star the year prior to a second team All-NBA guy last season, what he did in the Olympics, what it seems like anything's on the table for him this year. And Karl-Anthony Towns has been remarkably, I don't know. He's been both consistent and inconsistent, depending on, like, in these microcosms of a season. There's certain things he's always done well and other things that he's never been really consistent with. But you're going to get, if he plays the minutes, you're going to get production out of him. If he's on the floor, you're going to get production out of him. Yeah, the season ended badly in the conference finals, but he was fantastic against Denver, guarded Nikola Jokic and did a great job. They won in 7 games. In the first round, they swept Phoenix, and he was the primary defender for Kevin Durant. Like, Karl-Anthony Towns got a bad rap defensively for a long time, and I think people have now realized, look, you can't have the best defense in the NBA by far, the Wolves did last year, and have their second best player be a clear minus defensively. And he was solid off defensively last year. The shooting, I think, will be even better this year as he continues to get comfortable playing with Rudy and playing off of Ant, as Ant is now the focal point of the offense. I think having Cat and Ant 5th is absolutely, that's the right spot for them. Because here's the other thing, like, it's not crazy to think Ant could become a top 5 player this year. And I've talked about this on previous shows. We'll talk about it in his player preview probably next week or early the week following before the season. If he just takes 2 less mid-range jumpers, takes one of those attempts at the rim and one outside the arc, which means he'll get to the line a little bit more often, he'll be that much more efficient. He's knocking on the door of 30 points per game. He's a better shooter than a lot of some of these other higher volume guys like an SGA. I think he can continue to grow defensively as well. I think going from, call him the 10th or 11th best player in the league right now to top 5 is not that big of a leap at this point for Anthony Edwards. To go from like 30th, where he was a year ago, to top 12 or top 10, which is what All NBA suggests. All NBA second team suggests he's a top 10 player. That's a bigger leap than what he even needs to do this year, I think, to get into that true superstar status. So I'd put Ant and Cat 5th. I think 6 is close. I have Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo at 6. I think Jimmy at this point, like, he's not a top 15 player anymore. Him and Bam are both kind of right around 20th best in the league. The rest of that roster is fine. It needs to be better if they're going to truly get what they should be getting out of Bam entering his prime years, or really in the midst of his prime years. He's like 26, turning 27 right now. And Jimmy's, of course, at the end of where he'll be able to be a superstar. Like this might be his last season as a top 25 player. He's going to be 35 next year. So Jimmy and Bam, though, I think are still 6, and I would say they're close to Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns. 7th on my list is Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and maybe you could argue they're a little bit higher. But I think Devin Booker, we need a little more consistency out of him besides, the couple of things that he does extremely well. And Kevin Durant, at his advanced age and what he's able to do at this point. And I think also, like, honestly, recency bias and the way that they were swept out of the playoffs may have kept this at 7 for me. And really it was the rest of that roster more than it was those two. But 7 might be a little low. I'll admit that. Looking at this again, like you could have made an argument for them as high as maybe 5. You could maybe put them ahead of Jimmy and Bam at 6, maybe put them ahead of Ant and Cat at 5. I don't think I'd go in front of Giannis and Dame though. So I think they're still in that 5 to 7 range. But Durant and Booker would be next on that list. They would be followed. I think I got to go. This is tough. I guess I got to go Joel Embiid and Paul George at number 8. I struggled between them and John Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. with Memphis. We just haven't seen those guys on the floor in a couple of years. Jaren Jackson Jr.'s often hurt. Ja was hurt, suspended, the whole thing. So I think you got to go Embiid and PG, although health is obviously an issue there too. And at this point, Paul George, age is also an issue, but I'd put them 8. I'd put Memphis's duo at 9. And 10th, I guess, I don't know. I guess I go Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. And this is where it gets a little bit dicey. Like you could certainly argue they should be higher because Jokic is the best player in the league, but I don't know about Jamal Murray at this point. Like, I mean, if you take finals Jamal Murray from a couple years ago, or you take bubble Jamal Murray, like there are versions of Jamal Murray that are a top 12 NBA player, but we haven't seen that in a little while. And so I struggle to put them any higher than 9th or 10th on this list for those reasons. Like I don't know that he's a top 25 player at this point. And again, recency bias, what we saw in the playoffs, but I'm also projecting out like what's 27-year-old Jamal Murray with the injuries he's had and the miles he's had already, combined with Jokic, who like didn't look great in the Olympics. And I'm not at all saying he's not the best player in the world still, because he is, because he is. But I'd put them at 10. You could argue 9 ahead of John and Jaren Jackson Jr. certainly. But I think they're somewhere in that range. They're still top 10, but barely. My honorable mention would be, in some order, De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. I think Sabonis' breakthrough really kind of helped buoy their ranking. Not a whole lot of like true superstar power there, but they're both borderline all-star players. That's really good. So they're in the honorable mention group. I would put Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle there, more because of Brunson than Randle. Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram, although that's much more because of Zion than it is because of Ingram. And then the one other one you have to mention would be Kawhi Leonard and James Harden would still be in that conversation. But staying on the court in Kawhi's case, age in both of their cases, defense in Harden's case, they're in the top 15 duos, like for whatever that's worth, but they're not top 10. Cleveland's close, with Donovan Mitchell and Jarrett Allen. They'd be in the conversation for the like 15, 16 range. That was kind of the next one on my list. But yeah, I mean, there you have it. Like I do think Cat and Ant, I don't think that's crazy to say that they're 5th. And after talking through it, I kind of talked myself into maybe having them 6th. But like they're in that 5th to 6th range. They're not lower than 6 in terms of best NBA duos. And like, look, the only one that like after reading through this like a third time that I'm a little bit iffy on was having Murray and Jokic as low as I did. I just don't know if Jamal Murray is Jamal Murray anymore, and that's the biggest question. And the rest of that roster is so underwhelming at this stage that I don't know. It's just going to have to be a lot of Jokic, and that's the challenge with this exercise. Is if you think Ant is call him the 9th, 10th best player in the league, and you think Cat's 22, Jokic is 1, and Jamal Murray is 30. Like, where do you weight that? Is the gap between Jokic and Ant greater than the gap between Murray and Cat? Probably. But it also depends on what you think you're getting from Jamal Murray. So it's a really hard thing to parse, and a lot of these guys are really close to each other. But that's how I would rank the top 10 plus honorable mention duos in the NBA. I'll give it one more time. I'll run through it quick. Tatum and Brown 1, LeBron and AD 2, Luka and Kyrie 3. I have Giannis and Dame 4. I'll go ahead and put Durant and Booker 5, Ant-Cat 6. That's close. And then Ja and Jaren Jackson Jr. next. And then I have Murray and Nikola Jokic, Jimmy and Bam Adebayo with the Miami Heat, and then Embiid, Paul George. And then I think that's 10. And then 11 would be De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. Others to mention in no particular order: Kawhi and James Harden, Zion and Brandon Ingram, Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle. And that's kind of it in terms of a top 15. So there you have it. All right, I want to close the show by talking about the Timberwolves training camp roster. They made one additional addition, which actually may change the last update we had on the roster. We'll talk about that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors over at Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. No matter what live events you like attending, you can find tickets over at Gametime. Their curation makes it easier to save on all of the above, whether it's sports, concerts, comedy, theater, or more. They've got it at Gametime. You can also, one of their fun features, you can toggle on the all-in pricing feature. It lets you see the total up front, so there's no surprise fees at checkout. Again, just toggle on the all-in pricing feature to see that pricing up front. You can also get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy with their seat views. And they have Gametime ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKDOWNNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKDOWNNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, the Timberwolves, reported by Michael Scotto of HoopsHype, have signed Trevor Keels to what certainly is an Exhibit 10 deal. This was a bit curious to me because I literally said on the show yesterday that the Timberwolves were at their 21-player limit just based on the guys that they had reportedly signed previously. And most of those Exhibit 10 guys were reported by Michael Scotto. So I think one of them is not actually under contract. We don't know who because the Timberwolves haven't actually announced all of this. I think it's technically possible to have somebody with a complete non-guarantee in camp and get you over 21 players, but I'm not exactly sure how that works because it's supposed to be a 21-player limit. Quickly, we've got, I'll talk about Keels here in a minute. We've got the 13 standard contract guys. We have PJ Dozier's 14 on a partial guarantee. You have 3 two-way deals, Jalen Clark, Jesse Edwards, and Daishen Nix. The Timberwolves announced all those, so we know that that's a thing. That gets us to 17. So then you can have 4 guys on Exhibit 10 contracts. Most recently, the Timberwolves signed Jaden Ledee, reportedly Skylar Mays, and Eugene Omoruyi. Those 3 guys, I think multiple folks had reported that they'd signed contracts. The one that we haven't seen, confirmed anywhere other than the initial report, which I think was also Michael Scotto at HoopsHype, was Chasson Randle, the former NBA combo guard who's been playing overseas for a while. I have a hunch that perhaps that fell through, and that's where Trevor Keels comes in. A reminder, Exhibit 10 is essentially a preferred training camp invitation where you come to training camp, you have a non-guarantee contract, you get a $78,000 bonus if you are waived at the end of camp, but you stick with the G League team. So if you go play with the Iowa Wolves, you get $78,000, and you have to stay there for 60 days in order to get that bonus. You could always, I'm sure, break it and go play overseas and probably get paid more. But the idea is you're playing here stateside. You're in the system, as it were, when it comes to the Timberwolves, at least in this case, and would in theory be next man up. That's reportedly what the contract that Trevor Keels signed as well. Trevor Keels was on the Summer League team last year. He was also in training camp last year. And he played with the Iowa Wolves last year and averaged 13.5 points, nearly 4 assists per game in the G League. Shot a little below. He's like in the 35-36% range from 3. He is a defense first player. And that's kind of his calling card. He's a little bit of an undersized 2 guard. He's not a point guard really at all. He's more of an undersized two. He played 3 games for the Knicks a couple of years ago, was actually a second-round pick by the Knicks, 42nd overall in the 2022 draft, played at Duke. And there's a bit of upside there because he's a decent athlete. And I mean, he was one and done at Duke, and he was only 31% from three-point range there. Didn't actually shoot it that great from the free throw line either. But because he's so good defensively, there's a little bit of upside there between that and some shooting or some athleticism that pops a bit. Again, fine in the G League, not overwhelming in the G League last year. The Wolves liked him enough to bring him back, apparently, reportedly, for training camp once again, and probably an Exhibit 10 deal, which means he will almost certainly spend the season in Iowa with the Iowa Wolves. Some of the numbers in Iowa a little bit underwhelming for him last year in terms of some of the advanced stuff. He's shooting more than half his shots from outside the arc, but again, like basically a little below league average from outside the arc. So we'll see if any of that improved. He's essentially just some more camp depth on the wing for the Wolves. And assuming that, like, we'll say he's taking Chasing Randall's spot, the Wolves didn't have anybody else on the wing. Like Eugenio Marui, I guess, would be a wing player. Skylar Mays is more of a combo guard. Ladie's a big. Jesse Edwards on the two-way is a big. Jalen Clark is more of a guard than he is a true wing, and Daisha Nix is a point guard. So to get a bit more wing depth makes some sense. On the actual roster on the wing, outside of Ant, like behind Ant, you're looking at Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Obviously, Jaden McDaniels playing the 3 primarily. Joe Ingles is going to play at the 3. And then you're into the young, unproven guys, whether it's Josh Minott or Terrence Shannon or Leonard Miller. It makes sense to have just some additional depth there, guys that can push some of these other guys that are going to be trying to earn a rotation spot. That's where, to me, one of the biggest question marks is. Like, the backup point guard thing gets a lot of play, and rightfully so. But what's the answer look like at the 10th or 11th guy? And that's something we'll dig into a bit more here in the next few days. We'll get into player previews probably more early next week. But again, first preseason game a week from Friday. So we'll have to break that up a bit as we get into Media Day training camp next week as well. All that is on tap here at Locked On Wolves. Again, we're daily right now, Monday through Friday. Big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, no matter where you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube, and you can watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. And big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Now, for your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA show, where the local experts keep you updated daily on all the biggest storylines ahead of the season. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.